The frontier, blanketed in a silence as deep and white as the December snow, was a place where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. Christmas was only a few days away, a fact that meant little more than a deeper chill in the bone and a lonelier quiet. A young rancher named Cole lived alone on his family's property, the house untouched by a woman's hands, unprepared for what the wilderness would bring to his doorstep. When he found them stealing provisions from his storage shed under the pale morning light, he should have reached for his rifle. But something in the way they moved, a silent, coordinated grace, something in the defiant set of their identical shoulders froze him where he stood. They were Chinese twins, and the words they would speak to him on Christmas Eve would shatter every wall he had built around his lonely heart. What he didn't know was that an Angier weren't just hungry for food. And what they didn't know was that the virgin rancher watching them from the shadows would become the one thing more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. Cole had been alone for 8 months since his father died from fever, leaving him the ranch and nothing else but a silence that echoed louder than any storm. He woke each morning to the emptiness, worked the land until his hands bled, and fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing. The isolation had become a second skin, comfortable in its predictability. No one came this far out, especially not with the winter snows already knee-deep. No one bothered him until the morning he heard something moving in his supply shed. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath misting in the frigid air. Hired thugs had been spotted 2 territories over, men who killed for less than a horse. His boots made no sound on the packed snow as he approached the weathered wooden structure. The door hung open, swaying slightly. Inside, he could see shadows moving between the sacks of grain and preserved goods. Cole raised the rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. Then a figure stepped into the light streaming through the doorway, and every thought in his head went silent. They were identical, so much so it took his breath away. Slender but strong, with black hair braided into 2 matching plaits that fell down their backs. Their skin was the color of pale tea, their features delicate but etched with hardship. They wore simple cotton trousers and tunics that had seen hard use, and they moved as one, a mirror image of quiet efficiency. 2 Chinese women alone, stealing from his supplies with the calm focus of people who had done this before. Their eyes met his at the same moment. Dark, almond-shaped pools that held no fear, only calculation. They were measuring him, deciding if he was a threat. Their hands didn't move toward any visible weapon, but he could see the readiness in their bodies, the coiled tension of people who knew how to survive. Cole should have shouted, should have ordered them off his land, should have fired a warning shot, but the words caught in his throat. There was something in their faces, something raw and haunted that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. One of them turned away from him deliberately and picked up a sack of dried meat. Not running, not asking permission, just taking what they needed as if he wasn't standing there with a rifle pointed at her back. His finger loosened on the trigger. Wait, the word came out rough, scratching his dry throat. They both froze, then slowly turned their heads to look at him over their shoulders in perfect synchrony, eyebrows raised in question or challenge. Cole lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking, and he didn't know if it was from the cold or something else entirely. You don't have to steal it. Their eyes narrowed. They didn't trust him. He could see it in every line of their bodies, but they didn't leave either. They stood there holding the single sack of meat, waiting. He took a step back, giving them space, giving them the option to run. Take what you need. Just don't come back. For a long moment, they stared at him. Then, without a word, they grabbed 2 more sacks each, slinging them over their shoulders with a strength that shouldn't have surprised him, but did, and walked past him out of the shed. So close he could smell rain and jasmine on their skin. So close he could see the faint identical scar above their right eyebrows. They didn't thank him, didn't look back, just walked toward the tree line where the wilderness began, their stride long and purposeful. He watched until they disappeared into the shadows between the snow-laden cottonwoods, his heart still pounding. What Cole didn't see was that 50 paces into the forest, an Angier stopped. They set down the sacks and turned to look back at the ranch house, at the young man standing frozen by his supply shed. And for the first time in 6 months, something stirred in their chests that wasn't grief or rage. It was curiosity, and curiosity, they knew, was dangerous. A few days of relentless snowfall passed before Cole saw them again. He was clearing a path to the barn when he felt it, that prickling sensation of being watched. His hand stilled on the handle of the shovel. He didn't turn around, didn't want to spook them. Slowly, he went back to work, driving the shovel into the packed snow with steady force. Through it all, he felt those eyes on him. After an hour, he couldn't take it anymore. He turned. They were there, closer this time, sitting together on a fallen log just beyond his property line. Arms crossed, watching him work. They made no attempt to hide, just sat there as bold as sunrise. He set down his shovel and walked toward them, each step feeling heavier than the last. He stopped at the property line, an invisible boundary none of them had crossed yet. Up close, he could see the way their clothing was worn but immaculately clean, the slight calluses on their fingers. "Why do you keep coming back?" His voice came out rough. One of them, the one who seemed to be the speaker, answered, her English accented but clear. "You are not what we expected." "What did you expect?" "Violence. Cruelty. The things white men usually offer." She stood, and the other rose with her in a single fluid motion. They were not tall, but they held themselves with a presence that made them seem larger. "But you gave us food. You let us go. Why?" Cole swallowed hard. The question felt like a trap. "You looked like you needed it more than I did." Something shifted in their expressions, the hard edges seeming to blur slightly. "You live alone," the first one stated. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "So do we," she said it like a confession. The silence stretched between them, weighted with things none of them knew how to say. "My name is Cole." They studied him for another long moment. Then the speaker said, "I am an. This is my sister, Gio." The name settled between them like stones dropped in still water. And turned to leave, but this time she looked back at him before they disappeared into the trees. In that glance, Cole saw something that made his stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They would be back, and he wouldn't be able to stop thinking about them until they were. They came back on Christmas Eve, as dusk began to settle and a gentle snow started to fall. This time, they didn't stay at the tree line. This time they walked straight across his property, right up to where he sat on the porch steps, staring out at the white landscape. Cole froze, his heart hammering so hard he thought they might hear it. And Gio stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look at them, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in their dark eyes. "You are afraid of us," and said. Not a question, an observation. "I'm not." He stopped. Lying seemed pointless. Maybe a little. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." She sat down beside him on the step. Jill remained standing a few feet away, a silent guardian. And was close enough that her shoulder almost touched his. The nearness made his skin prickle. "But that is not why your hands shake when we are near." Heat flooded his face. He looked away, suddenly having no appetite for the cold air. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him fully, and the directness in her gaze stripped away every defense he might have. "You watch us the way a starving man watches food." Cole's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, wanted to stand up and walk away, but his body wouldn't cooperate. And leaned closer, her breath a warm cloud against his cheek. "We have not been with a man in 6 months. Not since our father died." The world narrowed to just the two of them and Gio, a watchful shadow, just the heat of Anne's body next to his, just the low rasp of her voice. "I?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I wouldn't know." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. Then something else, something that might have been hunger. "You have never been with a woman." It wasn't a question. But shame burned through him anyway. At 24, living out here alone, no town for miles, no neighbors, no one but him and the land and the silence. "No," he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Anne's hand came up, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been imagined. Except his skin burned everywhere she touched. That is not something to be ashamed of. Then why do I feel like it is? Because you think it makes you less. Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, and his breath caught. But maybe it makes you more. Gion's eyes met Gio's over his head, a silent conversation passing between them. Gio gave a slow, deliberate nod. And turned back to him, her gaze intense, her voice dropping to a near whisper, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Cole. We want sex with you on Christmas Eve. Before he could process the shocking words, before he could do anything but stare, they all stood abruptly, their bodies going taut, heads turning toward the eastern trees. Cole saw it then, what they had heard before him. Movement in the forest. Not one person, several. Torchlight flickering between the trees. They are looking for us, and said, her voice gone flat and cold. The woman who had been touching his face was gone, replaced by the survivor he had first seen in his supply shed. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt, and Gio's hand did the same. Who? The men we ran from. We have been gone too long. She looked down at him, and for the first time, he saw something like regret in her eyes. They will not understand why we are here. They will not understand you. 3 rough-looking men emerged from the tree line, armed with pistols and rifles, their faces hard with suspicion. They saw An and Gio standing over him, saw him sitting at their feet. The lead man's eyes narrowed. The girls come with us. Fang is tired of waiting. An answered in flawless, cold English, her voice sharp and defiant as she stepped in front of Cole. We are not going anywhere. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. That ain't your choice to make, sweetheart. You belong to Mr. Fang. You dishonored your father's debt by running. You come back now, or we burn this place to the ground with this farm boy inside. He gestured with his torch. Cole stood slowly, hands visible and empty. His mind raced. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat, burn his ranch and ride away. And Gio looked like they were weighing whether to fight or run. The lead man spoke again, a harsh command. And turned to look at Cole one last time. In that look was everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building between them, and the raw, stunning request she had just made. Then she and Gio started to walk toward the men, and Cole's hands clenched into fists, every instinct screaming at him to stop them. He was just one man against 3 hired guns. He had no chance. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. No. The single syllable cut through the night. The men shifted, hands moving to pistols. And Gio turned to look at him, eyes wide with something that might have been fear or hope or both. Cole, you cannot, and began. I said, no. He stepped forward, placing himself between them and the men. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. They stay here. Because they want to. Because they chose to. The lead man's expression darkened. You're a fool. One man can't stand against us. Your death will mean nothing. Maybe. Cole's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. But if dying means they get to choose their own lives, then I'll die. Because that's what decent men do. They stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even when they're terrified. And made a sound behind him, something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand tightened on his shirt. The lead man studied Cole for a long moment, then his eyes moved between him and the sisters, seeing something that made him pause. He was paid to retrieve property, not to die in a pointless gunfight over a principle. He spat in the snow. They ain't worth the bullets. Fang can find other girls. He turned away. Let's go. The other men followed, their torches disappearing back into the forest. They stood in the yard long after the men were gone, the gentle snow still falling around them. They had chosen exile, had chosen him over the devil they knew. You did not have to do that, and said finally, her voice rough. You could have died. I know. Then why? Gio asked, her voice soft. Cole turned to face them fully. In the moonlight, he could see tears tracking down their cheeks. Because 8 months ago, I buried my father and thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. Thought that was just what my life would be. Empty, quiet, safe. He reached up and brushed away one of Anne's tears with his thumb, then one of Gio's. And then you two showed up and made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. And I realized that safety isn't living. It's just existing. Anne closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and Gio mirrored the gesture. We have given up everything for this. For you. I know. And I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it. Anne opened her eyes, and the vulnerability he saw there took his breath away. Take me inside, Cole, she whispered. Her gaze flickered with the memory of her words from moments before. I need to feel something real, something good. I need you. They barely made it through the door before she was kissing him, hands in his hair, body pressed against his with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. He responded instinctively, backing her toward the stairs, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. Gio followed silently, closing and barring the door, a guardian to the last. Slow down, and murmured against his mouth, even as her hands pulled at his shirt. We have all night. They made it to his bedroom and suddenly the urgency shifted into something tender. Anne's hand slowed as she unbuttoned his shirt, fingers tracing the planes of his chest. He touched her in return, fumbling with the ties of her tunic, clumsy but careful. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, his voice shaking. Neither do I, she caught his face in her hands. With the men our father would have chosen, it would have been duty. With Mr. Fang, it was ownership. I do not know how to do this slowly, how to make it mean something. Then we'll figure it out together. What followed was awkward and fumbling and utterly perfect. And guided him with patient hands, showing him where to touch, how to move. He learned the landscape of her body in the darkness, every scar and curve. She gasped when he kissed the hollow of her throat, arched into him when his hands found her hips. When they finally came together, she made a sound that was half sob, half moan, and he understood this wasn't just physical release. This was two people who had been alone too long, finding home and comfort on a cold Christmas Eve. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin damp, breathing hard. Anne's head rested on his chest, his hand moving slowly up and down her spine. Gio sat in a chair by the window, a silent silhouette against the moonlight, watching over them. 6 months, Anne said finally, her voice quiet. 6 months we thought we would never feel safe again. Thought we would carry grief and anger until they killed us. And then you appeared with your soft heart and your impossible courage, and everything changed. Cole pressed a kiss to her hair. I was so afraid. I know. We could feel you shaking. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes warm and soft. But you did it anyway. That is what bravery is. What happens now, Cole? Gio asked from the chair. We cannot go back. We are alone in this world except for you. Then we build something new together. He tightened his arms around and stay here. Help me run this ranch. We'll make it work somehow. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we've all been making it harder than it needs to be by trying to do everything alone. He felt her smile against his chest. From the chair, he heard Gio let out a small, soft sound of amusement. The sounds filled something inside him he hadn't known was empty. The weeks that followed turned the ranch that had been Cole's prison of solitude into a home. And Gio moved through the property with the confidence of people who belonged there. Gio, with her quiet patience, gentled the mare that had been skittish since his father died. Anne, with her sharp mind, expanded the garden, planning for the spring thaw. Cole watched them one morning from the porch, coffee cup warm in his hands. He was different now. He could feel it in the way he carried himself, the way he could look at his reflection and see someone who had chosen courage over safety. Anne looked up and caught him watching, her mouth curving in that small smile that still made his heart stumble. She and Gio walked over, settling beside him on the bench, one on each side, their shoulders pressed against his uncomfortable familiarity. You are staring again, Anne said, taking his coffee and stealing a sip. Can't help it. Still can't believe you're real. We are very real, Gio said, her own small smile gracing her lips. She took his free hand, her fingers lingering on his. And we are not going anywhere. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the winter sun climb higher. Do you regret it? Cole asked quietly. Giving up everything. And was silent for a moment. We gave up a life where we had no voice, no choice, where we would have been passed from one man to another like property. She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and certain. What we found here is worth more than everything we left behind. We found freedom. We found partnership. We found a man who sees us as equals, not a burden or a prize. I found the same thing, he said, setting down the coffee cup and taking both their hands in his. You saved me. I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to me. And then you crashed into my world and made me realize that life only happens if you're brave enough to reach for it. And leaned her head against his shoulder. Gio did the same on the other side. We saved each other, they said in unison. They had built something real out of the snow and silence, something that would last. Cole pulled them close, and they came willingly, fitting against him like they had always belonged there. His father used to tell him that a man's wealth isn't measured in gold or land, but in the moments that take his breath away. He kissed Anne, then Gio. And he knew, with a certainty that warmed him better than any fire, that he was the richest man alive. They had all been broken in different ways, but together they had built a life chosen freely, a love earned through vulnerability and trust. And in the end, that was worth more than any kingdom any of them had left behind.